started. There may be some people who trickle in, but no problem. Welcome to the penultimate workshop in the Making Music Work series. Tonight's workshop will focus on studio teaching, exploring the ins and outs of managing a private music studio. Tonight's panelists are Smee, Tiffany Pinhorn-Smith, and Carole Clark, and myself, Carole Bestvater. We will chat about a variety of topics with the hopes of everyone leaving with a better understanding of how to operate an independent music studio, or at least with some ideas and inspiration. We will have a formal question and answer period at the end of the workshop tonight, but if a question comes to mind, feel free to ask as things come up if it's related to the topic we're talking about. We also are live streaming tonight's event, so questions will come up over the live stream, and we will answer those questions as well. We have a lot of people to thank for making this workshop series happen. We are extremely thankful for the support from the MUN Office of Public Engagement, DC Design House, Luxus, O'Brien's Music Store, Fred's Records, Music NL, the CFM and AFM, along with our presenters tonight. There is one more workshop in this series, marked down October 16th from 7 to 9 p.m., on your calendars for the workshop Scoring for Film, the What's, Where's, and How's. The panelists for that workshop will be Rosalind McPhail, Dwayne Andrews, Tim Hardy, Rosalind Dennett, and Sandy Morris. It will be an engaging evening full of interesting information. Be sure not to miss it. Without further ado, let's get started. We won't be taking a formal break tonight. However, please feel free to get a drink of water or use the restroom or do what you need to do. We will finish promptly at 9 p.m. I'll be facilitating tonight, getting the conversations going this evening. I wanted to include questions and topics tonight that not only covered the nitty-gritty details of running a small business, but also some questions that touched on the overarching philosophies that speak to why we do what we do. I think it's important to leave here tonight with some hands-on ideas and tools, but also to prompt everyone to think about the why behind those details. So, are we ready? Woo! All right, so we're gonna start this session by going around the table with a few questions for each panelist to answer. The question is, tell us about your teaching experience, what prompted you to start a private studio, training you invested in, and mentors who helped along the way. Why don't we start with you, Lauren?
Okay, can everybody hear me? I'm not used to using a microphone. So I've been teaching since 2010. I started a private studio because I had always, I think, seen myself teaching in one form or another. And I've always felt that my biggest strength as a teacher is working one-on-one, and so I wanted to be able to do a lot of that. I did consider whether to become a classroom music teacher, but that didn't feel like as natural a fit for me. And I think I was inspired by my teachers and wanted to be able to do the same thing for other students that they had done for me. In terms of training I have, I did a master's in performance pedagogy here at MUN, and I have done quite a bit of Suzuki teacher training. And I'm a body mapping teacher, so that training has also helped me in my studio teaching because it helps me to prevent any sort of playing-related injuries from coming up in my students and to know how to help them if they have those types of issues. And I have to say, all of that training has really contributed to my teaching. I get a lot of food for thought and ideas from all of those sources, and I continue to seek out ideas. We just did a Suzuki teacher workshop last week that was really helping me to clarify my goals as a teacher. But I'm constantly looking online for resources. I listen to podcasts by violinists and violin teachers, and I also see working on my own playing as ongoing professional development as a teacher, because that makes me a better teacher, and I get new ideas from that. I see myself as learning how to teach by teaching myself. And mentors, I've been very lucky to have a lot. Nancy Dawn has been a huge mentor to me. Jennifer Johnson, who taught me body mapping and still does teach me a lot. Both of them are ongoing mentors to me, and I've learned a lot from them. And Suzuki teachers in town have been really helpful to me. Christina Smith particularly taught me a lot when I was starting out and was very generous with her time. So I feel fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of really wonderful teachers. I learn a lot also just from the people I play with in the NSO, and I watch how they play and try and figure out things for myself, which helps me with my teaching. So I think, there's ongoing sources of support and training and learning all around us that I feel grateful to learn from.
Yeah, that's great. Tiffany?
Hello. So I started teaching when I was a piano student here at MUN. I got a job as a student teacher at a music school in Conception Bay South called the Music Corner. And my piano teacher while I was here was Dr. Maureen Volk, and she really kind of ignited my passion for teaching through being such a passionate teacher herself. So while I was, doing my student teaching in CBS, I kind of really realized how much I loved the one-on-one experience with a student, and kind of transferring the little things that I was getting from my lessons with Dr. Volk to these youngsters, the little ones. So I taught there part-time all the way through my music degree, and then after I graduated, I went there full-time and also went through kinder music teacher training, which is completely different, group classes for babies and toddlers. And I did kinder music and private teaching and administration full-time at the Music Corner for a year. That was a lot. And then after that, I did accounting for a year. Some of you might know that, might not. Yeah. That didn't last very long before I realized that my calling was to be a teacher. When I bought my house 4 years ago, I decided to open my own studio, which also fulfilled I stumbled upon a passion for business and entrepreneurship through my studio, and we've been going through that ever since. So I should mention as well, my husband Evan teaches at the studio with me. It's not just me, but I do most of the administration. As for mentors, I mentioned Dr. Volk earlier. The teachers I worked with at the Music Corner, the two owners of the Music Corner, Lisa Giles and Roxanne George, were really great to me. And also, as Lauren mentioned, we live in such an amazing, supportive community of teachers here. So a lot of my friends actually become mentors. We just talk shop all the time, exchange teaching ideas, challenge ideas. So that kind of really helps me stay motivated and on my toes. And as well, reading all the time, books and blogs and podcasts and things like that.
Great. Thanks, Tiffany. Carole?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My training is a little bit different because I'm from Ontario originally. So I went to the University of Toronto, and I received a degree in a Bachelor of Music and Education and the Bachelor of Education, and my goal at that time was to be a high school teacher, which I did. I taught strings, band, and mathematics for several years in the Toronto area. But when my husband received a job, he was a forester, into more rural Ontario, I found out that I couldn't continue being a high school music teacher. So what else could I do? Well, I could teach privately, and that's where my studio really began, although I did private teaching through university. And also, while I was in Pembroke, Ontario, I was involved with a community orchestra and became assistant conductor for that. Then I created my own orchestra in another town, my hometown, Pembroke. And I was also a choral conductor. And these are all, because you're working with amateurs, that's kind of a different kind of teaching as well, but you're still teaching and how to play music and be an ensemble member, etc. I was also doing some performing in the Ottawa area and involved with music camps in different places. When we moved here, I thought, well, I'll try again to be a high school teacher or some kind of a teacher, and I found out there's a hierarchy, so I was right at the bottom, working my way up. School boards got bigger and bigger, and so as a result, I became a permanent substitute teacher for a couple of decades and just retired. I did enjoy that, but it wasn't going to pay the bills because it was random. So in addition to substitute teaching, I was also private music studio teacher here as well. And my instruments are violin, that's my major instrument, but I'll also teach at different times viola, cello, and I have a very large piano studio now too. In fact, they're larger than my string studio. I'm very happy that they've done well. I'm really pleased with the different things that they've been involved in the community, and all the learning opportunities that they have had. And then there's one other aspect that I have become involved in that I'm very proud of. I'm the current president of the Newfoundland and Labrador Registered Music Teachers Association. And this is our vice president right here. Very happy to be here today. Anyway, so this is an organization I can tell you about a little bit later, but it's made of private studio teachers as well as university teachers, and it's there to help teachers. And I think there's some aspiring teachers here this evening, so you may have some specific questions along those lines as well. In terms of mentors, I'd have to go back to my Ontario roots. There was a professor at U of T named Dr. Patricia Shand, and she was particularly inspiring as a woman musician high up in the staff of the Faculty of Music, but she was also very instrumental in promoting the Adascan project back at the time, which was developing music for schools primarily, Canadian music and reaching out to composers. And I think at that time also they established the Canadian Music Center, which is like a library of music by Canadian composers. So I was very impressed with that. And in terms of a teacher, more directly, my very final violin teacher was a member of the National Arts Center Orchestra. I think he still is too. I don't think he's ever going to retire. And his name is Carole. And I was an adult taking lessons with him at the time, so it was sort of interesting to be an adult and the banter that we could have back and forth that you would never do with a kid. But it was fun, it was learning. He taught me a lot of things about he was teaching, and I very much appreciated that. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. And for me, my mother is a Suzuki piano teacher, so I grew up in surrounded by educators. So to be one of those, I think, is kind of continuing on a family legacy in a way. But so yes, I came here to MUN to do a master's degree and had already started teaching in a casual way. I did my undergrad in Brandon, Manitoba, and they have a really prominent Suzuki community there as well. So there was I'm going to do the questions backwards. I'm going to talk about mentors first. In the very early days of my undergrad degree, there was a Suzuki teacher named Rob Richardson Jr. who kind of took me under his wing, and I learned, I would say, so much of how I teach is because of my influence from him as a teacher, the games that I learned, and a lot of the kind of like the personality that is in teaching I learned from him as well. I observed him teaching every week for a whole year. The same students, so I got to watch the progression of that happen, and that I would say was one of the most useful things that I did as a young teacher. I'll talk more about that later, but so I came to Newfoundland to do my master's degree at MUN, and I continued to invest in Suzuki teacher training because I find the ideas the ideas are always incredibly inspiring, and I feel like I hone my craft more and more with more of those units that I do. And also, like Tiffany said, I read a lot. I would say there's probably like a stack of music education philosophy books near my bed. Some of the books that I love, like writings by Dr. Suzuki, I find really inspirational. Maxine Green is a philosophy and education philosopher. Her ideas are incredible. Ed Sprunger and Eric Booth, these are people who I read a lot. Some of them are specific to music teaching, some of them are more general music education philosophy. But I find it really intriguing to read a lot because there's a lot of inspiration to be had. So that's all of our contexts, which is, I think, helpful for framing the evening. Speaking of philosophies, I took a pedagogy course when I was in my undergrad degree, and the whole course was framed by our teacher saying, let's come up with our teaching philosophies. And I thought that was the most useful way to frame a course. And so like 18, 19-year-old Carole had no idea what her teaching philosophy was, but the act of having to think about what was important to me as a teacher was really important at that point in time and continuously. So I wanted to ask this question to our panelists as well, because I think the reasons why we do what we do are often how we drive the way we run our businesses and the reasons why we're teaching in general. So is there a particular teaching philosophy that shapes how you teach? Let's start with Carole this time. Switch it up.
Well, this kind of, I wouldn't say it was thrust upon me, but it kind of goes to something that I always heard as a young teacher. If you have a student who really is really struggling, you should let the parents know that they're wasting their money. Well, so I had this student who I knew she wasn't going to progress. We were just doing the same level over and over and over in violin. I thought, oh, am I supposed to say something? Am I being dishonest? Am I taking their money and, being just, selfish here? And it bothered me for a long time. So finally, there came the day I said, I really should say something. Well, this is the day the child came in bubbling. Oh, my goodness. And she says, Miss, guess what I did? I went to my grandmother's place and I played in Kiwanis there. Oh, no, I'm thinking, oh, lovely. Yes, and you know what, miss? I won my class. There's only another boy there, and I came in first. And guess what else? I got the junior trophy. So here's the situation. It's like boing, light bulb went on over my head. And I realized, who am I to say that you cannot take lessons? If it is giving a child pleasure and they're progressing, or maybe not progressing, but they're learning a lot of different pieces and they love the instrument, then that's teaching. That's still contributing and sharing with that child. So that became my philosophy for teaching. I will teach the person in front of me. I'll find out where they are if they've taken lessons before, and then grow from there. But I'm going to help that person to grow musically and just artistically and just generally wholly as much as I can. That and the fact that we have to be very flexible and wear many hats.
Yes.
That's it.
We'll talk about that later. Tiffany?
When I was thinking about this, I was trying to be very concise, which is not always my strength, you might find. But really, I think for me, it comes down to I want every student to leave my studio feeling a little bit better than when they came in. And I think we probably all share that. Most of the time, this is related to their playing. They come in feeling a little bit better about their piece or their scales or their technique. They had a breakthrough today, yay! But sometimes it's not music at all. Sometimes it's emotional or health-wise or whatever. It's a very special relationship we have with our students. So that's kind of how I try to frame each lesson. So if the lesson before didn't go so well for me or a student was, didn't practice or whatever, I try to reset for my next lesson and say, okay, I want you to leave feeling a little bit better than when you came in. I believe in teaching with compassion and understanding. And also, I believe that not every student is going to become a, concert pianist, but music should and can play a role in every student's life. So it's our job to find out how music can play a role in a meaningful role in their lives, and also recognizing that role can change and evolve.
I agree. Excuse me, sorry. I agree a lot with what Tiffany and Carole are saying. I think I had to think about my teaching philosophy recently because I made a website for the first time. I think probably most people have had one for a while, but anyway, I joined the 21st century and I have a website. So I wanted to put something on my website about my teaching philosophy, and that was the first time since I was a student that I sat down to think about it. And it's more or less the same as it was, but I think it's clarified over time, which I think is something that happens. We through experience, we figure out what's important to us. So I have always believed that every person has the innate ability to make music, and that it is our job as teachers to help them to discover that potential and realize that potential. And I believe that part of my job is to model that for my students. So I work hard to model what I teach for my students and to, to model the joy in music and music making, and the discovery, being detectives as we search for a solution to a technical problem or figure out where this phrase is going, that kind of thing. I try and also just practice habits. I feel like I'm the best teacher when I'm doing that for myself, as well as teaching my students to do it. My teaching is informed by the Suzuki philosophy, which is my background as a when I was a student, and a lot of my teacher training and the context that I teach in, and by the principles of healthy movement that I've learned from body mapping, and those are two sort of pillars that support my teaching. But yeah, that's my answer to that.
Great. And mine are similar as well. Just the concept that every child can learn, like how Carole and Tiffany and Lauren all said, and how I do feel like it is my job to figure out the how for each child that's in front of me and to adjust accordingly, and to do that in a positive and a positive and compassionate. I love the word compassionate in a compassionate environment that ensures success, whatever that means for that person in front of me. So I think that basically sums up how I think about it as well. And I encourage all of you to think about that as well. I think if teaching is something you're interested in doing, it really helps to drive your experience if you have that thought through in a way. So let's get to some nitty-gritties, shall we? Are we ready? Woo! So structuring your studio. Tiffany mentioned the words business and entrepreneurship earlier, and I think that is such an important part of being a private studio teacher. So we're going to talk about some of the nitty-gritties of being a small business owner and manager. So let's talk about structuring our studios, resources and ideas that shape the way we organize our studios. Okay, so I have a number of different bullet points that we'll talk about: teaching policies, how lesson pricing happens, contracts, scheduling. And if you have other ideas, they may come up naturally in this conversation. We'll see. But let's start, or if you have questions, this is a great time. We'll start. Oh, we have questions. All right, yes. Oh, we're going to bring you a microphone. Yes, it'll just be great for everybody. Thanks, Cassie.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. So my question is, I'm a student. I'm in my third year, voice major, and I've been really itching to delve into teaching, but I'm finding it like this big, overwhelming task. What's kind of the best way to kind of dive in when you really haven't taught before?
Ooh, to dive in when you haven't taught before? Actually, that's a good question. So, in fact, I think our next topic will help clarify a few things. But yes, so when you're diving, I think that when you dive in, it helps to be organized, totally. So, having teaching policies, kind of knowing what your expectations and standards are, will really help when you have to have conversations with parents and potential students and all that kind of stuff. So why don't we, with this in mind, with this idea of when you dive in for the first time as a new teacher, what are some things that will help you with this process? One of those things for me was teaching policies, actually. So why don't we talk about teaching policies first, and we'll come back to this question. So I think I'll start because I haven't started yet. So I think when I developed my teaching policies, it helped clarify everything because it gives you a leg to stand on when you have to have conversations with people. Your teaching policies should include, but not necessarily be limited to, what your fee is, how you want to get paid, expectations for practicing and lesson preparedness, your expectations for parents, whether that is if you want them involved or not. Some people want them involved, some people don't, and some people, that depends on how old your child is. Important for Newfoundland, what is your weather policy? This is actually so important depending on, where you live, but in general. And I would say that that's essential. It took me years to figure out my weather policy because it took probably 3 or 4 years of trial and error because what I was doing wasn't working. So, right. So thinking about how you want to structure what happens in case of inclement weather, and also like your lesson cancellation and makeup policy. If you start your teaching year with these in place, it will save you so much stressful conversations when things come up with parents, because you can say, please refer, in a polite way and in your own words, of course, but like, this is what my studio policy is, and then you can stick to it. So that's my experience with studio policies. I shall pass on the microphone to anyone who'd like to chime in. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with Carol that having really clearly laid out policies in advance really, really, really helps. And it helps to be a little bit stricter in your policies than you think you might actually be, because it's much like you can make an exception or you can relax if you've set a really firm boundary, but it's really hard to set that boundary after. Right? If you start out sort of more go with the flow and then you realize that's not working, it's harder to set that boundary. That being said, I want to say, like, if you're just starting out, just take a student, Like, I think we all have over time figured out what works for us and have, clarified our teaching philosophies and our policies and our every payment procedures and all of this stuff and the even like this physical space we teach in, all of that is you're just refining it over time. But the best thing you can do if you feel like you're ready to start teaching is to start teaching somebody, and it may not be the ideal absolute end goal circumstance that you're teaching in, but you're going to learn so much from it, and that student will learn a lot from you, and you'll figure out what works for yourself and for your teaching goals. So yeah, teaching policies. I think I was a really a reluctant small business person for a long time because we don't go into music teaching because we want to run a business, right? We don't go into it because we're profit oriented. And we don't see ourselves, at least I didn't see myself that way. That's why I really admire you for saying that you really embraced it and you took accounting and everything. I didn't know that about you. Because I think I'm only in the past year or so, I was really starting to embrace it and see how giving a little bit of time and attention to that side of things can actually make the teaching better. So I wrote out my studio policies this summer. I'm just coming back from a maternity leave, so I feel like in some ways I'm pushing the reset button on my studio in a little bit. I feel refreshed and I have new ideas, and I'm coming back from a break. I feel like if I want to do things differently, this is a good time to begin as you want to go on. So I rewrote my teaching policies, and I was really, really upfront and clear about what I want and what I expect. So what I expect in terms of practicing, I laid that out in a way I had never done before. What I expect in terms of payment and payment policies, all of that I wrote out, and I had people do an online registration where they had to do check boxes like I understand, like for the most important, I referred them just to a document, but for the most important things that I wanted to make sure that they had really read and understood, I repeated them, and there was a checkbox. I understand that Lauren does not give missed lesson, or makeup lessons for missed lessons. I understand that Lauren expects me to practice at least 6 days a week. I understand, those types of things, and I had them all check the box, right? So I've become, I think, more comfortable with being a hard ass, to use that expression. And I think that when I'm upfront and direct with people ahead of time, it gives them a lot more clarity about what they're signing up for, what they're committing to, and lets them think that through before they make the commitment. I have all this on my website so people can see it before they even sign up with me. And I think saves some headaches down the road. Have I answered the question?
That's great. Yeah. Any other input about teaching policies?
Yeah. So I am the same as Lauren with reiterating the policies that you really want your parents and your families to understand. Probably most importantly, your makeup lesson policy, because that's an easy one to get burnt out from. And another thing that I included in my studio policies that hasn't come up yet is discontinuing lessons.
Yes.
And it's a nice little quip that, sometimes for whatever reason, for whether it be, on the student side or the teacher side, it is the right choice to discontinue lessons. But in order to kind of protect yourself, I would recommend just putting a discontinuation policy in place, minus 30 days, because then that gives me 30 days to be able to fill the slot with a new student. And the student can choose to come during those 30 days or just say, you know what, I'm just going to eat the cost for those 30 days and say farewell. But in my policy as well, it states that before discontinuing, we all need to sit down and have a conversation about it, if possible, because I think that helps everybody move on with the best outcome. And I have my family sign a couple of places in the studio policies so that if there hasn't been, but if there is ever any kind of, arguments, I can kind of go, you knew about this. So, and scheduling, will we get to
Yeah, we can talk about sure, let's talk about scheduling.
I don't know if that, does that fit into?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
We talk about policies before you
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
Carol, yeah.
I wasn't sure.
Okay.
Sure, yeah.
Just to add to the idea of the policies, so you're starting off with your policies, especially for new teachers, or how you want to run your business, like how you want to receive your payments, and going to the hardcore things. Sometimes things happen. The weather happens. People are moving on, and they're going to terminate lessons. So these two ideas have been addressed. But then we also have other things where people don't pay on time, and you have bills to pay at a certain time, and where they should be paying their bills on time. So a number of years ago, I instituted a penalty, and if you go to Walmart, if you have an NSF check with them, they're going to charge you at $50 some odd, I think. It's very hefty. Most stores are very high. So I actually have not that high, but I do have a penalty for NSF checks and also for late payments, because some people pay by e-transfer cash. So if it's late, it's the same thing as an NSF check. And as a result, I have very few late payments. And so I made it high enough to make it a deterrent. So I hate doing that, but it is a necessity. So just something for you to keep in mind as you're setting up your studios. I was going to say something else. Oh, yes. For policies, I have my own policies. I mentioned that I'm associated with the Registered Music Teachers Association. And we have policies also. They're not forced on teachers, but you could have, and Ontario, I got these from Ontario originally. We adapted them to Newfoundland. I'm just going to read off the 7 things here in general. Lessons will be paid for in advance. Appropriate notice must be given prior to termination. Allowances cannot be made for lessons missed by students except in cases of emergencies. In the event of the teacher's absence, adjustment will be made. Time lost because of a student's lateness cannot be made up. The student should not enter into examinations, performances, or auditions without the prior knowledge and approval of the teacher. Parental involvement in the student's musical endeavors is welcomed and appreciated. So our members can, as well as their own individual policies, may also use these as well. And it's kind of a nice thing then, because jointly we say, it's not just me. Music teachers feel this way as well. So it's sort of a nice benefit to have that support from the association.
Yeah. No, thanks, Carol. No, that's great. I'm going to pass around an example. Tiffany brought her studio policy, so I'll just pass this around and you can take a look while we start talking about scheduling.
Yeah.
Do you want to take it away?
When your studio hopefully gets filled up, you have to deal with the jigsaw puzzle that is scheduling all of your lessons. I've tried a bunch of different methods, and I still don't know if I've found the one that works the best.
I'm with you.
But I find, number one, this kind of goes into policies and procedures as well, being very clear about when you are working and when you're not working. For example, my teaching hours are 3 to 7, Monday to Friday. If somebody says, are you free on Saturday for a lesson? I can't make it today. For a long time, I would say, yeah, sure, I'm free on Saturday. Come on Saturday. And that is, I think, a surefire way to completely burn out. Yes. So if we don't get to it, I just really want to say this to everybody who is a teacher or wants to be a teacher. You have to take care of yourself first before you can take care of your students. And you're a better teacher if you're taking care of yourself. So be very clear about when you are not working.
Yes.
And the method I found best for scheduling lessons has been to get all of my family. So I usually schedule at the end of the previous year for my returning students. They get first dibs at the lesson times for the next year. And then after my priority enrollment is over, I open it up to my wait list or new families. When they give me their times, I send out my schedule first. This is when I'm working. They give me 3 times, their top 3 times that they would like to be scheduled for. And they don't get to tell me, 1 or 2. You have to give me 3 options. And they're not guaranteed to get the same spot that they had the previous year, because some people expect to have the same thing year to year, but everybody's schedule changes, so they know that the slate is wiped clean at the end of June and going into September again. So I tried a little something different this past year with a doodle poll. Do not recommend it. It was so much extra work for me. So that's the method that's worked best for me.
Yeah. Any other scheduling tips?
I think what I've done is similar to Tiffany's top 3. I think I might have got that from you, actually.
Yeah, I do that too.
It was
great.
very, very helpful, because before I did that, it was just a lot of back and forth emails. Oh, sorry, can you do 3:30? How about 3:45? The top 3 thing really helps. One thing I did was I did give people a chance to keep their lesson time, like that. If you have Mondays at 4 and that works for you next year, you get the sort of right of first refusal on that. But sometimes I would ask people if they could switch, if it would help accommodate another family. If your studio is big, it's really important to have a good system. If your studio is small, you can just kind of say, okay, when can you come? Well, so-and-so can come at this time, so maybe you can come after them. Hey, that works, okay, But when your studio is big, you need to have a system so everybody feels like it's fair, and so that you don't spend too many hours at it.
Yeah, scheduling is really hard. I do something similar. I have families give me 3 options, and I try to work with that. And also, I have the kind of right of first refusal, so you can reserve your spot. I don't feel like likewise. I don't. It still feels like a lot of energy to figure it out. I have 24 students, I guess, so there's a lot of families, and I have a lot of families who are in things like competitive gymnastics. So I find it's not a perfect system still, because I still have families who I say, give me 3 time slots, and they, on August 15th, when I said, please give these to me by June 30th, and still on August 15th they say, well, this child's gymnastics are X, Y, and Z, and the only time she can come is the day that I have all of my other teaching scheduled. So, or like all my other students have had their lessons reserved since June. So you're going to come up against these situations constantly every year, and it's just part of the job, I guess. I think some people, there's different things that work for me too. I think looking the whole year in advance is really helpful too. I have noticed in my life that I have a lot of touring opportunities that come up in May, so I just build that into my teaching schedule and my tuition statement and all that. It's like, I will be gone for these weeks, be prepared, and so we deal with that sort of thing. But the farther ahead you look and the more you plan on a big scale, I think it's easier to keep yourself accountable and to keep families accountable. So that's kind of and it's good for me. It's good for me to have to keep myself accountable because we are our own employers, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah. Any other thoughts, Carol?
Just on a sort of a different side of scheduling, and that is, should you put a little buffer between each student? I don't do that. In fact, I like to have my students be really self-sufficient. When they come in, they go to the waiting room, they get their instruments ready, and I have some books there and other activities that can do that. And my studio's right next door, so that when one student is finished, I try to stay on time, the other one comes in, so it's like passing ships.
Yes.
And we go straight at it. If it's a violin student, their instrument should be ready, bow, rosin, the book's out, ready to go. So it really is get right into it as quickly as possible. So that was the other part about scheduling I wanted to add.
Any other questions from audience members about studio planning and logistics? Yes.
I was just thinking when you were talking about long-term scheduling, is I think one thing, I don't know if we actually said really clearly, but what I recommend and what I do is I ask people to commit to the whole school year, and I ask them to pay me up front. Yep. They can divide that payment into post-dated checks, or this year I'm trying e-transfers for the first time, so we'll see how that goes. But I really like it when people pay me up front so that I have it, even if it's not deposited yet, right? Because then that means I can do all of the business side of dealing with the money in September, and that's all taken care of, and then all we have to do is just deposit checks or whatever. And it means that I have a commitment from students that they're not sort of just dabbling or trying this out. They're really committed to me for the year, and same as Tiffany, they don't get the month's money back if they a month's notice for discontinuing, right? And I send them my schedule in advance, and I don't think of my teaching as an hourly rate. I mean, I have an hourly rate that I use if I'm teaching a one-off lesson or something, like, to somebody who has another teacher, but they're in the summer or whatever. But and I use that hourly rate to calculate my tuition for the year. But I use it. I give students the lump sum. So your total for the year is X. You can pay that in either divided into two, one in September, one in January, or divided into 10 equal monthly payments. So it's not a per lesson payment. And I was thinking about that recently, and I actually think that reflects the way that I think about my teaching, because there's a lot of time that you're giving to that student outside of their lesson, and some of that is your administrative time, some of that is your setting up studio space and keeping it tidy. Some of that is time that you're spending looking for repertoire for that student, or emailing their parent to check in with them about something, or sending them a resource, or looking something up, or asking another teacher for some advice on something, or researching ADHD, or you're doing a lot of things outside the lesson and to prepare for that student. And so your hourly rate has to reflect that. It can't just reflect the hour you spend with the student, because that's not the only time you're working. And so then that's why they don't pay hourly, is because they're not just paying for that hour of my time, they're paying for a place in my studio, which means they're paying for a place in my life, right? And in my work time outside of my actual teaching time.
And for your expertise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, we have we have a question from James, and then we'll come over to you over here, okay? Yeah.
This is it's a little bit of a step back, but
No
Carole
worries.
had mentioned that you incorporate a late fee for payments that are beyond that. Sorry, I can talk louder into the microphone. You had mentioned that you incorporate a late fee into payments when they're not received on time. I was curious for the other panel members, other kind of methods that you go about to ensure that payments are received on time. Like, do you delay lesson starting times or anything like that?
I incorporated a 10% late fee if people don't pay by the end of September for the first time this year. And I've ever.
I have had this pain instruction learn, so I either the first week so I can do one in December and one in January, and 10 post text. I have been really fortunate with my studio so far. I have had to do a limit. Yeah. I think that the 10% is great. Great policy. The other thing I do is this is a little more time consuming, but I like having it for my records. I issue a full invoice, an official invoice to every student, so they get it in their inbox. So even that is a little bit of a like, invoice, and they get an official receipt afterwards.
Yeah. I do that as well. I think it really helps. I haven't done a late fee yet, although I have thought about it. I probably will. But not that I have that issue a lot either, but I think it's good practice. I think I started doing invoices and receipts. It really helped to kind of make it more like a business too. So I think that helped families take it a little more seriously. Yeah, we have a question here as well. Yeah.
Hi. For students, if they have a conflict with their lesson time, do you allow them to have the contact info of your other students so that they can switch times?
Yes, so I do this. This is something my teacher in high school did, and I adopted this recently when I was getting infuriated with makeup lessons because I didn't have a clear policy. So the way my studio works is that at the beginning of the year, when I'm done the jigsaw puzzle schedule, everyone in all of my families in my studio they've seen my studio policies, and everyone gets a master list of contact information and a copy of my schedule of my teaching hours. So, and I make it very clear that if you have a conflict with your schedule because of a dance recital or your volleyball tryouts you didn't know were going to be during your lesson, whatever the reason is, your first step to contact another family in your studio and switch lesson times if that's applicable, and to let me know about the change. So a lot of times families will email me to say my child can't come and I have to remind them of this policy, and I might give them some suggestions. It's like, oh, this other child has the same lesson time, or the same, like it has a 45-minute lesson as well, you can try. Because some families are also more flexible than others. So I do give some insight when families contact me with this to act on this policy. But when I started implementing that, the idea of makeup, and once my families got used to this concept as well, it made scheduling makeups and the concept of makeups a little more smooth, because they know that I have a no makeup policy, but it's a little more forgiving for families who do have a lot of other activities to balance. Yeah. So I found that very helpful. Yeah. Good question.
Do the same.
Carol, do you have any problem with parents saying they don't want their contact information given out?
I always ask before I do that, and I've never had an issue. But I do. That's a good point, Carol. I do always make sure that it's okay to share contact information, for sure. Dan, you had a question?
So I know that three of you are string players.
Right.
I'm also a string player. And as we know, as string players, learning to play is difficult.
Yes.
And it takes time. And you're reprogramming your nerves and your fingers and learning things and all of that. So I see a place where the philosophy part, which all of you, and I know Carol's very good at it because my son studied with her for 10 years, about going to where the student is, which you talked about as philosophy, and scheduling come together. Because isn't it true that the student and the parents don't necessarily understand what a difficult thing it is to learn to play an instrument? And that's why I just wanted to support you guys and say that's one of the reasons why having a firm policy about scheduling lines up with that philosophy, because it's only after 3 years, 4 years of consistent effort that you sometimes begin to see the potential emerge. That's all I really wanted to say.
That's a really good point. Thank you for sharing
Absolutely.
that. Yeah, it's really true.
Or makeup policy?
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
Because that's a fun topic.
Oh, yes.
We have another
Do you have a question that's related to makeup policies or still? Okay, yes, let's have your question first and then we'll talk about makeup lessons.
This is something like related exactly to this topic. Might be something later, but I was just wondering, like, advice you would have when it comes to starting a studio, like how to grow a studio, and how to like find students and like attract people into just how to find people, more or less.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Great question. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just writing it down so I don't forget any parts of it. That's a really good question. I was lucky when I moved here because it corresponded with another violin teacher moving away, so I kind of had an influx of students. But I found that, so I'm lucky that I've never really had to advertise for students. Also, being part of an organization, I think, really helps too. So if there's a music organization, like an existing studio or a teacher's association that can help, I think those things are really helpful. Like being part of the Suzuki organization, because we're STEP faculty, we get references from families who join the Suzuki program. I think also word of mouth is incredible. Like once you have, and I do think that word of mouth is your best tool, because once you have a few students who are really happy with you as a teacher, they're going to tell their friends and you're going to get recommendations, and then all of a sudden your studio is going to grow. So I think like ensuring that your students are having a successful experience, and I don't mean successful as if like they can play all of the concertos. I mean successful in terms of like they're leaving happier than they came in each week. And seeing that they can progress a little bit here or there, or just feeling like their heart is a little more full. I think that is a really powerful tool, honestly. Yeah.
I think word of mouth among musicians as well is really helpful. So like if you know other music teachers who might be full and maybe getting students they can't take, like just putting the word out that you're looking for students, people will, like I know among the string players, like in the orchestra or whatever, will be like, oh, are you looking for students? Because I had somebody who wants lessons, but I'm full, or I don't teach Saturdays, they want Saturdays or whatever, right? So if you, I think word of mouth is powerful. And if you just make it known that you are accepting students, it'll circulate.
Yeah.
I'll suggest two more. If you're looking for students, put something on your Facebook page that you're accepting students now. I've had some success with that, and even more success by putting your name, by becoming a member of, it sounds like a commercial, become a member of the Registered Music Teachers Association, because on our website we have a page of teachers with contact information. I've had a lot of inquiries through that over the years, so that's another thing, because people from out of province, that's one way that they're going to be looking for who's teaching in the area. That's a definite plus. And the other fact, when I say that you could get inquiry from out of province, is that our association is part of an umbrella association of the Canadian Federation of Music Teachers. So there's a lot of liaison in this regard, and people are familiar with other provincial associations. That's why they would think to look for Newfoundland to have one also. Commercial over.
Yes. Makeup lessons. Let's talk about makeup lesson policies. I have two, actually, before we get into that, Lauren shared a resource with us while we were planning this event, and I printed off a copy. This article is incredible. It's called "Makeup Lessons from an Economist's Point of View," because you will get the question. You will get the parent who doesn't see it this way, and it'll take a little bit of education for them to see it this way. And I have literally sent people this article, like not in like a mean way, but in this will help you understand the perspective that I see it from. Yes, it's like the no return goods idea, right? It's like the time is gone. So this is a fabulous article. I'll leave it here and people can peruse. It's also easy to find on Google if you just Google makeup lessons from an economist's point of view. Make sure you write that down because it's an excellent article. Also, speaking of commercials, I just have to mention this too. The CFM, like the Canadian Federation of Musicians, also has resources for music teachers as well. Like the teaching contract is a really great thing as well. So I use this with a lot of my students. There's a lot of language on it that looks a little confusing initially if contract language isn't something you're used to seeing, but I think it's really excellent. And the students that I use this with are like, it just makes everything clear. It's like you will have X lessons between X dates. It will cost this much money. And the other thing it does is it makes a pension payment into your pension account if you are an AFM member, which, as a self-employed person, is a really big deal. So, and also whenever I use these teaching contracts, I just think it helps parents see you taking yourself more seriously too. So it just goes hand in hand with this idea of like running a business and being a professional. Yeah, so that being said, if you've got a contract, you've got a set number of lessons, but things happen, life happens, and someone asks for a makeup lesson. What happens next?
I think that probably all of us have gone to a no makeup lesson policy, right? Yeah. Through working for other studios where, you know, they're catering to a very large studio, like they have hundreds and hundreds of students and they're trying to find the policy that works best for everybody. I have worked in a situation where I had to make up 2 lessons for students, provided they give 24-hour notice or whatever. But when you have a studio of 35 students, and if every student is requiring 2 makeups because they did really well and they gave their, 24 hours notice, that becomes a lot of extra work, a lot of extra work that you have not scheduled for yourself. And also, it often leads to having more than 1 lesson in a week, which over and over again, that is not productive from my point of view. So I don't offer makeup lessons, but what I do is I set it out so my semester is, for this year, 36 weeks long, but students only pay for 33 lessons. So that allows for 3 wiggle room weeks. Technically, they're only supposed to be for me if I'm sick or if I'm going on vacation, because a lot of times we don't get a sick days. We don't, so I've built those in for myself, but I tend not to use all 3 weeks for all of my students. So I am a little bit more flexible when they have to miss a lesson and they're really concerned about, getting this makeup lesson. I say, well, we have a couple wiggle room weeks left, so we'll just end our lessons on June 22nd instead of June 15th or whatever. And that I've done that for the past 3 years and it's worked out really well for me.
Yeah.
So.
I do a similar thing as well. I think it works. I love the wiggle room label, though. That's so great. Similarly, so I have like a wiggle room lesson, just 1 for each semester, essentially. So I end my teaching. So like the scheduled end of my semester happens, but usually the wiggle room week is the week after, and I'm for the most part teaching a full week, depending on sick things or if I had to cancel here, there, or the other thing. So. I think that's a really good policy. It's a really good concept.
Yeah. Here we are.
Yes.
I'm more of a softie, I think, in terms of makeups. But here's how I control it. There are certain things that I will not make up lessons for. Birthday party, forget it. Late sickness, they don't show up, no. And I don't want them to come sick either, so it's a bit of a dicey thing there. Funerals, definitely I'm going to make up that lesson. A school trip that's related to music, that's part of their music education. Their choir goes to New York. Well, yes, I will allow it. So I keep a list of eligible makeups, if they're eligible absences that could be a makeup. And then what I do every Sunday, and I have a large studio, I have 40 some odd students, which is my norm. But anyways, so on Sunday, I go through my list, and I have this little pre-made up form that says, you are receiving this because you are eligible, you're a student who missed a lesson and you're eligible for a makeup. These are my holes, and I only use holes if I know someone has a dance concert. That's a hole in my schedule, so I could be sitting there doing nothing, or I could do one of these eligible makeups. I don't use any of my family time or anything. It has to be only during this preset time. And so I send the list, and then if nobody answers, then I'm sitting around doing nothing during those holes, or maybe I'm using up one of the makeups. And then around June 1st to say, you have till the end of June to do your makeups if you want them. And then that's it, it's gone. In terms, this is where I'm real softy, I think. If somebody goes on a vacation for 2 weeks, and a lot of people go to Florida in mid-year, so I say, all right, The first week you forfeit. The second week I will make up if you want it. If you're away for 3 weeks, you're forfeiting 1 and 3. If you're away for 4 weeks, which doesn't happen too often but has, I will agree to make up weeks 2 and 4 at some time, but you have to find it during my holes. So I know you're not going to agree with me on that one, but I do. And maybe it's because I'm a little older than you guys, and I'm a parent, and my kids have been involved in things. And I also see my students, too. We get a lot of really keen parents and students, and they're devastated that they have to make this choice. But they really, if it's a group thing that they're going to, then that's a commitment. And if I run an orchestra, and they're going to Kiwanis, and they're going to miss their lesson, well, I think that's a great thing that they're in the orchestra and going to Kiwanis, and I'm going to make up that lesson if they want it and if they can find it during one of my times that I send out. So that's my policy. So it's a little bit case decision each time, but I'm somewhat flexible, but not totally.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Carol, because I think another it goes back to the idea of have your policy, but what happens in real life is often a little more flexible. One of my colleagues says, like, as a rule, the first time they ask, the answer is no, because you're trying to set a precedent. But of course, like a case-by-case situation, I do the same. I have a no makeup lesson policy. But of course, if there's something that happens and it's a student who really cares and like would really benefit from having that lesson, then, but you know, they have a funeral, a family member or something, blah, 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 who knows what the reason is, then I often will find a gap in my schedule that exists and put it in. But I think as a rule, like if you say yes the first time, then they're always going to keep asking. But if you say no the first time, then they're going to know that you're serious about what you've set out to do. Are there any other questions from the audience? Yes.
We have some questions from online.
Fabulous.
Yes. So someone has said, a teacher has said that they get a lot of emails and texts within the evenings and weekends. So do any of you guys limit emails and texts?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yes. I've become very good at compartmentalizing my life. As teachers, and I think just as freelance musicians and people in general, we all wear many hats. And so one thing that I've started to do is I set office hours for myself and I don't advertise that to my family, but I just know, like, in my week, and I do it at the beginning of the week where I say, okay, this is the day and the time chunk that I'm going to do my studio admin. And I try and stick to it. And that's when I try and get as many emails, calls, things that have to happen in that chunk of time. If something is really time sensitive, of course, I'll deal with it in a time sensitive manner. But I do have like a Carol shut off here time and Carol don't start until here time. So because I figured that out, but I need those two things for myself to function. So yes, so I don't answer my emails when I'm eating my breakfast, otherwise my days are always worse. But that's a personal thing. So yeah, any other thoughts from panelists?
I'd like to jump in on that one. Yeah. I totally agree. You can't answer emails while you're eating breakfast. I remember once when I was earlier, when I was younger, I was lying in bed it was the first time I had a smartphone. I was lying in bed replying to an email from a student, and I was falling asleep while I was sending it, and I was like, I don't think this is the right time to have this email sent, because who knows what it's going to say anyway. So you have to set boundaries with yourself. So I think for me this year, I'm teaching 3 days a week, and I have childcare 3 days a week. And that has actually brought a wonderful work-life separation to my life that I never had before. Because when I have childcare, those are my hours to get things done, and I try really hard not to do like household tasks and family things, because of course I work from home, so I have to set a firm boundary with myself that, like, this is my work time, this is my practice time, this is my studio admin time. And I did put in my policies that those are my work days, and if you email me on Tuesday, Thursday, or the weekend, I'm probably not going to reply. That doesn't mean I never check my email on Tuesday, Thursdays, or the weekend, but that means that I don't feel obligated to get back to them within 24 hours. And people know that, and I think it's reasonable.
Yeah.
I try to get back to people within a reasonable time frame, but I don't have email notifications on my phone anymore.
I
highly recommend it.
Yeah.
And I encourage people to text me if they're like, running late for this lesson or something, because I don't have my ringer on in my lessons, right? So I'm not checking my phone. But if I notice that a student has not arrived, then I will check, and a text is the fastest way. But other than that, I've never explicitly discouraged text messages, but I've never loved it when students text me, because with an email, if I check it at a moment that I don't have time to respond, I can mark it as unread or flag it or whatever. But with a text, once you've looked at it, it's gone, and then it's easy to forget to reply. So I much prefer when people will email me if they want to get in touch.
Same. Yeah. Exactly the same. I highly recommend. It took me a long time, until I had my son, to really realize how much I was just tethered to my studio all the time, because we work from home. A lot of it. Well, I think you travel a little bit, but working from home really makes it very difficult to separate your work life and your life. So setting those hours, and this year I actually did send to my families, these are my office hours. Please don't expect a quick reply, before this time or at this time, and then it takes that weight off of my shoulders. When I get that call or that text or that email, I can be, say, no, I don't need to do this right now, and that's been really helpful for me.
And I think the important thing that came out of that too, one of the important things is clarification with parents, right? Is if you make that expectation clear to parents, they will, if they don't remember to, if they still text you in the evenings, at least you have the weight off your shoulders. No, I told them, so then I can hold myself to this and help hold them to that too. Were there other questions from our live streamers?
There is one more. Someone has asked if any of the panelists use software like Music Teacher's Helper or My Music Staff, which helps with scheduling and invoicing. And kind of what are your thoughts on that kind of software?
I think whatever works for you, go for it. Totally. I don't. I know I have used software for invoices before, and I think it's really great. I just have the invoicegenerator.com or something like that. There's a lot of invoice generators online that are very great, so just find the one that you like the best. So I haven't really used software. I use Google Spreadsheets a lot for things. But yes, if you find software that works for you, it's great. It does help streamline things. What about your guys' experience?
I don't use any special software except for writing up music stuff. I use Finale. I know there's really expensive ones, but Finale.com, you can just download it, and it's inexpensive, and you get really decent printed out music and parts and orchestra stuff.
Oh yeah, I use there's a program called Muse Score. That's a free online music program that you can use to write music out. Fabulous.
I actually have used Music Teacher Helper. I had it for, I think, a year and a half maybe, and then I actually let it go. I thought it was a great program, but I wasn't able to customize it enough for me, but I learned a lot from the program, and then kind of took that knowledge and then did my own thing. And I do a lot of spreadsheets, and I make my own invoices. But I learned a lot from having it. So if you're starting out and you kind of have your own studio, I definitely would recommend subscribing for at least a couple months, because some of the skills you'll learn from that, like invoicing and scheduling and things like that, it's really helpful.
What was it called, Tiffany?
Music Teacher Helper.
Great. I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, I've never used any software like that. I've looked into it, but I felt like one thing to think about when you're running your own studio is the money that comes in is your business income, right? And I keep that in a separate account, and then I pay myself out of it. And so I have to sort of think strategically, do a budget for the year of okay, I have this much money coming in, I have to pay myself a certain amount a month so I can eat, and I'm going to have these kind of expenses, because of course it costs money to, there's violin maintenance, there's buying sheet music, there's, stickers and printing and going to Staples and all that stuff. And you have to pay your taxes at the end. Anyway, I did the math. I felt like I had other things I wanted to spend the money on, other than the software. Yeah. But, yeah.
Yes.
I want to agree with what you just said, Laura. I run 5 businesses, an arts management business, a garden business, and then I do books for 3 bands. And the only thing that keeps me from jumping off tall buildings is that each of those businesses has its own account, and I make sure that every deposit is notated and every expense goes through the account. And that way, at the end of the year, although it's a bit of a zoo, I get my taxes done, and I know what I've done. And the final thing is that I just got a check in the mail yesterday for $1,000 because I registered for HST. And I get to, as a rebate, all the tax that I paid on anything that I use for my business over the HST that I've collected. And a lot of people who earn less than $30,000 don't have to do that, so they don't do that.
Yeah. Right.
That's a mistake. And that's all about record keeping. Okay.
Would it be helpful to talk more about record keeping and the kind of business money side? Yes, I see some nods. Some nods? Okay, I see enough nods. All right, record keeping, business side of things. This is something that you don't learn in music school, but it's really important. I want to take a year of accounting to continuously get better at it. I can't recommend this enough. It's just so important to get knowledgeable with some sort of record-keeping system. I mean, I just use like spreadsheets, like Google spreadsheets. Once you learn the basic formulas that you need, you can do so much. And it's just incredibly important to stay organized with your finances. It will save you so much stress in tax season if you are. Yeah.
I mean, just in case anybody isn't aware of this, like, if you're not teaching yet, if you are self-employed, then none of your income is taxed at source, which means you have to save money to pay your tax bill at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, maybe maybe you all know that, but I feel like this is the kind of thing that nobody actually says to you when you're young, right? Oh yeah. And nobody taught me the first thing about taxes ever, really. So I'm just going to say that in case anybody didn't know that. And it depending on how much you're making, how many students you have, it might be a little bit more than you think it's going to be.
I almost had a heart attack.
Yeah.
My first year as a non-student and then doing taxes, and I almost died. Like I was just like, okay, this is my life. Okay.
Yeah. When you're teaching full time, it really adds up, and you end up with a big tax bill at the end of the year.
Yep.
Heads up.
Do keep your receipts for things like any music-related things that are for your business, if it's for instrument repair, books that you buy. Also, if you're in your home, you can declare the percentage of your home that you're using as your studio and the waiting room, whatever it is there. So those home expenses of rent and electricity, all that stuff, maintenance, heat,
phone bills,
oil, phone bill can all be taken off your gross income. And so then your net income is what you're going to get taxed on. And so it's a fair bit less then. So, but make sure you keep your receipts for years because they can come and ask you later.
Yeah. For 7 years.
See.
Yeah. And they do, I do know somebody who's been audited, though they don't, I used to think that we were such small potatoes, but they do audit music teachers sometimes. So, yeah.
I have just like boxes, like go to Staples, get those like file folder things. They're worth having because I just have one for each year where I keep my receipts in, and I keep my invoices, like just have records of what you do. It really pays off to be organized in the business side of it.
And I'd say take your taxes to an accountant.
Yes.
Yes.
We used to try try and do it ourselves, and I just found it so complicated. But when you take it to an accountant, it is simpler. And then the thing that they ask you when and every year I have to remind myself of this, but when you're sitting in the accountant and they're like, so do you have gas receipts? Do you have any work-related, travel expenses? I'd be like, oh, so then write that down, and next year keep your gas receipt. You know what I mean? Like whatever it was that you forgot about that you couldn't claim, they'll tell you, and then you'll know.
And I think you can find a list on the CRA website of things that are tax deductible. I feel like I've seen a list before somewhere. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but perhaps if maybe that information is findable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Dan. Yeah.
There are huge advantages
Yeah.
to running your own business.
Absolutely.
In addition to the headaches of running your own business.
Absolutely.
And I include the fact that, as Carole said, there's an option to claim use of home and the utilities associated with that. Travel. The category that I love is research. Now, I write film music. I don't do it a lot. But since I write film music, every time I go to see a movie,
Research.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know this because I was audited.
Yeah.
Said to the auditor, okay, what portion of me standing at the top of Signal Hill, which was one of those waves, which gave rise to a story that was published, et cetera, was personal, and what part was research? And he looked at me right in the eye and said, that's up to you.
Yeah.
Never forget research, and all expenses include things like meals, travel, vehicles, clothing, costumes.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
If you make good use of it as a self-employed person, you can claim things that an employee cannot claim.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. To come up with a system that works for you and stick with it. And if you want to be here.
Yeah.
I'd recommend keeping track. I'd recommend keeping track of your finances on software such as Quicken. There's other ones out there too. And that way you can see your income and your expenses. You can make charts, how much, looking at your budget, or how much did I spend this month, compare that to last year. It's a lot of useful things there. In terms of tax, my dad taught me how to do my tax when it was really simple when I was a kid. So when I started working as a private teacher way back, it was all paper copy then, and it seemed pretty straightforward, so I did my own tax. Now, when we moved here, and there were moving expenses, that this is going to be phenomenal. We can't do this anymore, have our personal finances and my business things. So we went to an accountant, and he charged us hundreds of dollars. And then I looked at it, I thought, he didn't find anything. I thought he would find us some tax breaks. I knew all this. So I do my own tax, but I use TurboTax, which saves data from previous years. It prompts you. There's forums, which are government forums, and you just make sure you got the data you can put in on advertising. Oh yeah, go Quicken. I spent that much on Quicken. Okay, put in my TurboTax. So TurboTax costs me, I think, $35 a year. What's an accountant now? It'll be $100, $200, depending on how big your file is. So if you're good at math, then there are some there's some software out there that you can do to track your own finances.
Yeah.
Any questions about this topic? No? Anything from online? Nope. Okay. Cool. Any general questions? Anything we didn't cover that you were hoping to hear? Yes.
So I'm looking into a career kind of into a unique side of music in the Canadian Armed Forces, which would require me to potentially up and move my life from one side of the country to the other. Not saying I would want to do like a full-time studio, but if I wanted to have a small studio, would you recommend doing something like, in a contract, just noting it's like, this could end, like, and there's always notice, but it's like, lessons could end at any time with this much notice, but just letting the families know that there's a chance you could be moving across the country, or leaving for taking 6 weeks off because you're going to the UK to do something, or anywhere in the world really, just giving like a disclaimer, I guess. Would you include that into a contract?
Yeah, I think that like the more information parents get and the expectations that you have are like upfront at the beginning of the relationship is always best. And I understand because I play in multiple bands and am on tour, especially in the spring and in the summer, and sometimes things come up. So my families know that in my policies and when I'm having conversations with parents, it's always really clear that while I will, of course, maintain as much consistency week to week as possible, and my priority during the school year is, or from September to April, I say, is my like the consistency of lessons. So this is my experience. This is how I do it. But I'll build in some weeks into my year for touring, so that it's not a surprise and parents don't feel like they're out if I have to cancel their lesson. But I think what would be important is to kind of look at how you would want that to go. Like how can you imagine that conversation and preparing for it? And that's a good question. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I agree.
I have a thought. Did you say you were possibly moving?
Yeah, so the job at any point, they could kind of just tell you, you're going to go from Halifax to Victoria now, and like that you're doing that 6 months from now.
And then you're gone from here. Is that right?
You'd move from, like if I was in Halifax, I'd be living there. They could say, okay, you're getting posted. You're going to Victoria 4 months from now. That's your new home. That's where you're going to live.
Yeah. Well,
so I wouldn't like say like having a big studio, because that's kind of not my goal. But like if you have a small group of like 8 to 10 people, and then just bringing the resources with you, even, and just moving your studio from one part of the country or one city to another.
Yeah, definitely.
my personal feeling is that if you were to say that now, I might be moving, but I don't know when, people will say, well, I'm going to get another teacher right now. So personally, I would, if it's uncertain, you could be here for 2/3 of the year. I think you should consider just going the flow. You have a policy that says that if the teacher terminates lessons, like you can give them notice, the same as the other way around. That's true. And you could assist them to find teachers at the time.
Yeah.
But you have to maintain your income until you leave. You haven't left yet. So I would be very careful what you say. When I was in high school, I mentioned it was my final year, and I got to be concertmaster of the orchestra, but I told the teacher, who was new, I said, I might be in a musical in January, so I have to wait and see if I can be concertmaster all year. And at the first rehearsal, she said, this is Carole, she's concertmaster till December. This is Rosie, she's concertmaster in January. And no, that's not what I said. And so I lost my opportunity my final year of high school. And there have been other little things like that. If you say you might do something, people will act on it right then. So in my mind, I think you should be careful before you say anything.
Point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, maybe have a couple of teachers in mind that you can refer them to if you do have to leave on short notice, and like have that in the back, whether you choose to disclose initially or not, you have that plan for them. So when you say to them, I'm really sorry, I've had a great time, I have to go, here's who you should contact next, so they don't feel like they're just left without, a teacher.
That actually, your question just reminded me of another topic that was kind of raised earlier, but how to get students when you move to a new place, which is related to how to get students. And one thing I was thinking that would be useful is just is playing concerts, like going to schools or daycares or community centers or churches or whatever, wherever sort of families and kids or whatever age group you think you would want to be teaching might be, and performing for them and bringing some brochures or something. That's just one method of sort of putting your name out there that we didn't mention that I think is really useful, particularly if you're moving into a new place and you don't know other musicians in the community yet, you don't know the word of mouth and everything. So yeah.
Any other? Yes, another question? Cassie will come with the mic. I'm going to also just pass around these two articles while we're hearing this question.
Hi. So my question is, I have like a little business started of my own, and I was just wondering, do you have any ideas as to how to get money to like kickstart music-related projects in the province? Like, where's a good place to go for kind of funding?
Oh, sorry. Could you repeat the question for me? My apologies.
So if you're looking to like start a new project within your studio or whatever it may be music related, where do you go to seek help or funding?
That's a great question.
That's a really great question. Yeah. Any ideas? I haven't tried that.
Music NL?
Yeah, music. I mean, there are different funding opportunities here. Like, there's two different words. So, there's two, I think, roads you could go down in this opportunity. Like, yes, there are funding sources available in our province. There's the City of St. John's has grants to artists and arts organizations, so you could apply from them. Music NL has funding. Arts NL has funding. Depending on what the nature of the project is, there are other pots of money you could access. Another thing that you could do is you could include that in, depending on what the project is, you could include that as a studio fee. Like if you want to have some sort of performance project, but it's going to cost like a couple $100s, you can distribute that among the families and break it down so that it's like minimal cost per participant, but still doesn't put you out of pocket. So it just kind of depends on the nature of the project. Or do you have a specific idea in mind, or just kind of as a concept?
Yeah, so I just put off my first musical. We did Beauty and the Beast Jr. at the Sheila Nagara Theater.
Amazing.
And I just got my second grant this year, so we're going to do Little Mermaid.
Oh, amazing.
But I want to do something bigger and have more shows, so I obviously need a lot more funding. It was really hard trying to fundraise. It was an entire year of trying to get money together. Didn't really make much of a profit. It was just more so a learning experience for me and the kids.
That's so great.
If I could just ask a member of the audience who I know has experience with funding, Mr. Rubin.
I've done a lot of fundraising for arts projects over the last 3 or 4 decades. And what I've learned in general is that it's all about the power of the story.
Yeah.
So if your idea is one that captures people's imagination, then all you really need to do is to tell that story and wait for people who resonate to it, to connect with it. And sometimes they're not the people who you would expect. I've worked on projects where kids in schools are putting quarters in jars. Now that was not the arts, that was a park project. But originally we didn't expect to have kids putting quarters in jars. Do you hear what I'm saying? So although there are the formal funding agencies, and I'm not talking about crowdfunding, the most important aspect to any fundraising is that you be able to explain, I call it the elevator pitch, what it is you're setting out to do and what the benefits of that will be. And it's called the elevator pitch because by the time you go from the first floor to the 10th floor, you've sold the person who happened to walk into the elevator, and they're now going to support you. So, and the rest of it is a matter of ingenuity and effective communication. So that's where the creativity really pays off. But it starts with the story, the sticky story, I call it. That's helpful.
That's great. Thank you.
100%.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not sure this question like you have like a straight answer for or anything, but like, is there any recommendations of how to determine like your fees, like how to determine what's reasonable or what's necessary? And
Oh, totally. Yeah, I think you, like a general question, like a general approach is like find out what the standard rate is in your community among your colleagues. And then, so ask people and don't be nervous about it. Be like, if you don't mind telling me what your rate is, and find colleagues who have similar education experience to you. And then you can kind of set your rate based on what the standard is within your community, what your education experience is, and what you need to live off of too. I think those 3 things are essential. When I moved here, I didn't do that, and I set my rate lower than anyone else without even realizing it based on a different community's standard. So it took me a while to kind of be like, oh, oops, and then I had to spend time kind of catching up. So I think that's an essential part of it.
I think the point about asking people that have similar experience to you is important. I did ask a little bit, but I asked teachers who had a lot more experience. So they told me what their rate was, and obviously I wasn't going to charge that because I was just starting out. But they also told me what they thought the rate for people starting out was, but it was probably the rate that had been the starting out rate 20 years ago. Do you know what I mean? So I think I also started a little lower than I intended to and had to work my way up.
Yeah.
Regardless, I'll just say of what your rate is, even if you find a rate that you're happy with, you feel like this is an appropriate rate for me to be charging, this feels fair, you need to raise it a little bit every once in a while because you need to keep up with inflation.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I, like every 3 years or so, I raise it a little bit. And what I do is I go online and I find the Consumer Price Index, which tells you what percentage of, cost of living has risen in Canada over the last 3 years. And then I do the math on my hourly rate, and then I round to the nearest whole number because
Who wants to deal with
I don't
them?
like math. So I want to make the math as simple as possible. So because if you find a rate that you really feel good about and then you don't change it for a long time, it's not going to feel good anymore.
Yeah. The other thing I do is I give myself a raise every time I invest in my teaching. So anytime I take a course or anytime I take a unit of teacher training or like a different course that furthers my education and knowledge as a teacher that's going to benefit my students, I give myself a raise. Just a little one, but something. Yeah.
And nobody questions it.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time we raised our rates, it was last year, after 3 years, and I was so nervous hitting that send button. I was like, nobody's going to come back, but they all value you. If you're doing a good job, they value, and they know the experience that you're getting. And, I had done some courses and things like that, and I felt good about what I was doing, but I was still nervous. Just if and when you get to that point, just realize nobody's going to argue.
Yeah.
It might be instrument related also. So if you play an instrument there's not many students and not many teachers, they might charge a bit more. I won't name any instrument in particular because they'll get found out. But I have noticed that difference there.
Yeah.
Hold on, I just had a brain fart.
Oh gosh, no worries. Take your time.
Right. So a lot of you mentioned kind of your varying life experiences, kind of your different backgrounds as teachers. I'm, like I said, currently in my undergrad, but is there anywhere besides obviously kind of graduate studies or undergraduate studies, anything that can kind of help? Because you mentioned kind of any learning experiences you have can obviously kind of help
Absolutely.
boost your fees. Is there anything else that you find your students really value in a teacher that would be good
Definitely.
life and teaching experience, whether that be music for young children or going to master classes, anything like that?
Yeah. What's your instrument? Sorry?
I'm a voice major.
Amazing. Yeah. So yes, the answer is yes. You'll find, I think there are lots of opportunities. Being a Suzuki teacher, I think, really helps because they have, and there is Suzuki voice, which is really neat. So you can, I think that's a good opportunity to further your experience and knowledge as a teacher. There's pedagogy workshops. It doesn't have to be a degree program per se, but every once in a while, things will pop up. I'm trying to think of specific.
I know the Royal Conservatory every year hosts teacher summits. I don't know if that's just for piano, but they also do teacher specialist courses that you can do, and whether or not you teach Royal Conservatory or not, but it's a good way to kind of be networking with other teachers from across Canada, and it's all online. The summits are usually in Toronto. But and webinars, things like that. A lot of the conservatories will have resources for their teachers who are signed up with them.
Yeah. I read a lot.
Yeah.
and that's not necessarily something that is a course that gives me a credential that I can then raise my rate, but I find that it just gives me more food for thought and sometimes just very applicable activities and games and structured ideas, and then that will help my experience, that will help my students, that will help my families see me as more professionals because of this idea that I've implemented, and then a year later I bump up the rate if you.
Yeah, I think anything that just gives you food for thought. So things like like the Suzuki Association and the Royal Conservatory and organizations like that provide these training courses. And I find that just being in a room full of teachers talking about teaching is so, it's so inspiring. It's so helpful in getting my brain going and figuring out what is my answer to this question. It may or may not be the same answer that the person teaching the course is giving you, but that's okay, because you're like, if it's a fruitful discussion, you're getting some sort of wheels turning from it, then you've gotten what you need out of that resource. And yeah, reading, and I've actually found a lot of there's a lot of I don't know about the voice world, but I assume it's the same. These days there's a lot of like violinists and violin teachers online who have blogs or podcasts. I've gotten a lot out of those things, and some of those people are more accessible than you think. Like I wrote into one, and then they read my question on the podcast, and I was really embarrassed. I'm not going to tell you what podcast, but anyway. But like, like there's a lot of if there's a mentor out there, like even if you don't know them personally, but somebody that you admire, that you read their stuff, or you've watch their master classes on YouTube or whatever, you can get so much out of those types of resources, and you can reach out to them and maybe they'll reply. You never know. So yeah, I think there's anything that gets you, gives you new ideas to try. I think students appreciate that, because we've all had this experience, I think, when we're going to a teacher and we're getting the same answer every week to our issues, and we've maybe gotten as much out of that particular answer as we're going to get right now. And maybe in 10 years the penny will drop and you're like, oh, that's what they meant, right? We've all had that experience. But it's so frustrating at the time when you're going to the lesson every week and you feel like, hey, you told me that last week, and I know I'm trying, but that's not working for me right now. Like, so I think anything that helps us sort of get creative about finding new ways to approach something for a student really helps them to, maybe even just a different way of saying something, but it helps them to hear us. It helps the lesson to feel fresh and creative, and they really appreciate that, and they walk out with it like, oh, I never thought of it that way, or oh, I have this new way of practicing. So yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes as a teacher doing that, saying like, if somebody's had the same issue for like 5 weeks, on the 5th week, you'll say something completely ridiculous and it will actually work. And then you put that in your back pocket for the next time, I find anyway, you learn the most by teaching and being open and being willing and crazy and not being afraid of, because you're not gonna hurt them.
I refer to it as my proverbial toolkit. It's like, that's another tool from my toolkit that I'm going to keep for a future moment. Yeah.
I'd like to comment on one thing that I like to do every year, which I find refreshing and helps my teaching and has in the past, and that is going to Kiwanis and watching not just my students, but like several classes in a row. I'm watching the adjudicator. And so I'm assessing, I hear a student play a piece, not necessarily my student, and it might be a piece I know or I don't know, and I hear a new interpretation. And so I'm sort of evaluating myself as a teacher. And then to hear the adjudicator explain things, maybe give a demonstration, and talk maybe sometimes about the history or something. Many adjudicators are really awesome. They're fountains of information about everything, and even specifics about teaching. Maggie Morrison, I think it was, a couple of years ago, junior piano. So she brought a ball in, and she had kids bounce it, and you had to catch it like this. And she said, what you're doing is developing the muscles here, because you have to snatch it. You can't scoop it. You have to snatch it. So you're practicing piano when you do this. I went everywhere to find a ball after that. And I have my students do this, and I say, okay, so you have to strengthen those fingers, all the joints. Now catch it 5 times with your left hand. So sometimes it's a gimmicky thing, but sometimes that's a tool that you can use, and then you're talking about physiology of the hand and how it relates to your instrument. And that can be applied to violin also, so I do it with all my instruments. But and I always take a notebook with me. If it's a real adjudicator, I'm writing down all kinds of stuff. And it may be something I know, but they say it differently. So it's a new twist on how to see something. And even with my own teaching, I'll say, okay, are these round fingers or curved fingers? And what do you want to call them? I'll say to the students, whatever word they agree with, that's fine, that's the word we're going to go with. But hearing an adjudicator come up from his or her background, new expressions or words or something is really useful too. One year I had an adjudicator, and I had a lot of students playing, and it was the same person. I sat the whole 10 days, and I had not a word written down until the last day. And she said, now, when you do that melodic line, it should be, how did she say it? Oh, gosh, I can't remember now. It was really good, though. I use this expression all the time at the top of my head. So a creeping, oh my heavens, I'll have to write it down and send it to you. But that was it, I wrote it down, and it's a brilliant idea of how to get the feeling of the weight creeping from one finger to the next. Doggone. I'll try to remember by the time it ends. Anyways,
You mentioned notebooks, and that reminded me. We're just going off. I don't know.
Oh
Stop
yeah,
us
no,
if you want, but-
we're in with the official question and answer
Okay.
period. Yes. Yes.
I think a notebook is one of the most valuable
Absolutely.
tools you can have as a music teacher and as a musician. And I have at any given time, I have 3 or 4 notebooks on the go for different purposes. But I keep a notebook just for my own practice journaling, and that gives me a lot of insights for teaching students. But also, I think we probably all have some form of keeping records of what we did with a student, because you will not remember.
Oh, this is
you think you will, and you will not.
Lauren, you just tapped on a very important thing we did not talk about.
Yeah, so
Continue.
I think maybe we should all share the way that we keep track. And I don't know that I've solved it, but for myself, but this year I have a small notebook, and each student each week has a page, and it has a little ribbon built into it. So that goes in their lesson last week, so that if I need to quickly take a note. And so what I do, I plan lessons, and it's less of a plan than more of a thinking through what are my goals for this lesson today. I read my notes from last week, and I think through what are my goals for this lesson today. What do we want to follow up on? What do I want to achieve with them? And some ideas about how I want to do that. And then after the lessons, and this is not immediately after one lesson, because then we teach back to back. So after the day's teaching or the next day, I'll sit down usually with a red pen, and I'll do a little X. Oh, we didn't get to that. Check mark, did that. And then a few notes on, how things went, anything we did that I didn't plan that had just happened, a good idea, something that was struggling, something I said, oh, next week we're going to do this. And even by the time my teaching day is done, I've often forgotten things. It's so frustrating. But now, this year, my new thing is I have a whiteboard right next to, so
The other thing, I think, anyway, we're connected. Anyway, sorry, go ahead, sorry.
So I assume we're both going to say that the whiteboard is essential, because I write down in the middle of the lesson if somebody says something that I want to make sure I remember, I just jot it down on the whiteboard. And I have all these little reminders. And then my goal is each day before I start teaching, I write, I can erase the whiteboard because I have transferred the things off of it somewhere and dealt with them. So I don't always achieve this goal, but my goal is that, if it was send the student this, whatever, email them this, or, some, I don't know, whatever, or something I want to look up, or any little thing that I want to follow up on in some way, I do that. And then I can erase it from my whiteboard.
Yeah, I do that too.
And that helps so much. And so the other day, a student told me that she found, I haven't watched it yet, but some YouTube show about a violinist and a pianist. And I didn't know this, but this is a teenage student who said that this show is the reason that she's kept playing the violin. And so, and she told me the name of it, and I wrote on the whiteboard, because I'm going to check it out,
Yeah.
Or if the student says something funny, or they tell you they like, I don't know, Star Wars or whatever, those things are important, because you will then next week be able to pretend your bow is a lightsaber or something, or follow up on that joke. And though, I think I used to think I would not need to write those things down, but when you have a lot of students, they get jumbled in your mind, and you need a system.
Totally.
My system is very, very similar. I have, at the beginning of the year, I print off a 2-pager for every student, and on the the front and the back of each page, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, up until 33 lessons, and under each little block, there's like 5 or 6 lines. So every student has a file, and I update that file every single week. So lesson 1, this is what we did, and then I similarly like. For next week, I'll write it under the lesson 2 spot. But the really cool thing about that is at the end of the year, I show it to the student. Like, look at where you started and look at where you are, and they can take it if they want. I never write anything like mean. All nice thing. I would never write anything mean anyway. But the other thing that I wanted to just touch on is Lauren mentioned about having a lesson plan for your students and prioritizing things and, having an idea of how you want the lesson to go. And that's so important. A lot of times, depending on the week that student has had, your plan might have to kind of go out the window. So what I've started doing this year is I have a whiteboard next to the piano, and we collaborate, and I write down what I would like to do, and then my student and I, we talk about it, and we come up with a priority list of maybe 4 things. Cool. Yeah, and it always has to include like the basics, like your technique, your theory, whatever. But maybe what I wanted to do is not going to work because they've put more work into a certain piece than I expected them to, or whatever. And so far that has been really cool. And it's actually the students take a lot of ownership then over the lesson. They're not just kind of sitting there waiting for you to tell them the next thing. They're I think, feel like they are a part of the teaching process, which of course they're an essential part of the teaching process.
Definitely.
That's fabulous. I like that.
That's a neat idea.
I found a really cool whiteboard at Winners that it has priorities listed. I was like,
cool.
And I bought it.
I want to let Carol talk, but I'm just I'm excited about this. So thinking about prioritizing and goal setting is something I'm thinking about a lot lately. This Suzuki Principles in Action course that we took last weekend had a reading from this book called Intelligent Music Teaching that was all about sort of
Robert Duke is the author.
Yeah, Robert Duke. I haven't read the whole book yet, but the chapter we read was really great. So it was all about, I think of it as the difference between a good lesson plan and a good lesson. I've written a lot of really great lesson plans that never happened because this child walked in and they were not there that day. They were there, but they were not in that lesson plan that I wrote. And they needed something entirely different. And and he talks about writing your lesson plans as like a list of events. A lot of teachers write a list of events, work on, the first movement of whatever piece, right? Or work on this, work on that. And you could do that and not get any better at it, right? You could work on it and not get anywhere. And so he talked about clarifying your goals for the lesson instead, and which brings prioritization in, because like, what is your overarching goal for this student today for this lesson? And it's good to have sort of a list of activities or ideas you could use to get to that goal. But you may not get through them all. You may not need them. You may not but you are always working towards your goal. So you're going to pivot because the student, is tired today, or because they practiced this more than that, or because what you thought you could do in half an hour was totally unrealistic. But you're keeping in mind that goal that you're working towards for that lesson today. And that is my goal as a teacher this year, is to not let my lessons sort of get into laundry list kind of lack of clarity, but to work towards a goal in every lesson.
Okay, so rather than me keeping the files like they do, and I'm not saying that's bad because I like a lot of your points here too, but because I have a lot of students, I use, instead of a whiteboard, I use sticky notes for things that come up that are really cool, and then I deal with them later. But each student has one of these. This is just a homework book, essentially. The Student Music Organizer. And in addition to useful information at the front and the back about music history, composers, music notation, etc., there are multiple pages that look like this. And each page has general lesson notes, theory assignment, techniques such as skills and exercises, pieces, studies, and comments. And there's a chart for recording time. And there's music down here, so if I have to make up a little exercise for a student, I can do it right there. There's also manuscript in here as well. And then when the student comes, this goes on my desk. And I can kind of remember what we did. But this way, who's accountable now? The student is accountable. The parents can see what the homework was. I can just look it over really quickly and say, aha, that's where we left off. I'm going to check that you've got that done. Those specifics that I've, not just the name of the piece, but specific bars often, or some approach I want them to take. So I want to see that that's done, and then we can progress from there. And I can also see, oh my gosh, I flip back, well, we've had 3 weeks on the same thing, though, and it's not going anywhere, so I can opt either to persevere or say, this isn't going anywhere, let's try a different piece. Often I'll say, you pick a piece, come in next week, I don't care what you pick a study, pick a piece. Do some sight reading, review pieces, so that's all part of it, and I write it in here. So that's the homework side of it, and the accountability and the lesson planning. I do also have a binder for my more advanced students, because I figure I better practice their pieces a bit, so I'll keep a list of what pieces that they're working on there, so I can think about it during the week and play through them and get an idea. From this same, the woman who created this student music organizer, Darlene Irwin, she has a website, and you can download these wonderful piano technique charts if you're following Royal Conservatory of Music. I have adapted them for violin also, because she just does piano. So this is a grade 3 one, and there's 6 days here, and it takes all the RCM technique and splits it over the days. So I decide, okay, everybody, we're now learning day 1, and I'll circle the things I want them to do. And let's say they've got 2 days to, so you're going to alternate. Today you do day 1, tomorrow you do day 2. Next day, do day 1, day 2. That way, they're going to cover all the technique for the grade level, and I can see what I haven't assigned, because if I haven't circled it. And instead of them thinking, I'll just practice the ones I like to, or trying to do everything every day and not getting around to their pieces, this just sort of allots it. So it can be more focused. They can repeat exercises off and on. So these are downloadable, I think, for $2, or you can have them mailed. I just usually tell my students, you go, have your mom with her credit card, go, mom or dad, and just download it onto paper. Paper's fine. Black and I like color better, because she specifies here the green ones are hands separate, white is hands together. When you get into diminished 7s, she color codes them so you can see which ones have the same notes. So she's rather clever that way, and she's updated for the new conservatory. So these are really super. She has other useful techniques there. I have a calendar that I like to use for my studio that I hand out. I had problems reusing it each year, though. I don't know what's wrong with my computer, my thinking. So I just use her basic idea. But if you go to her website, she's got a lot of useful things there, history sheets, note naming, things you can stick up in your studio or students can purchase themselves.
That's Darlene Irwin?
Darlene Irwin, IRWIN.
Awesome, thanks for that.
And the
Carol.
website is... The website, where's this? She's changed this year. I think it's the Student Music Organizer, all one word, is her basic website. www.studentmusicorganizer.com. There it is, it's on the back now.
Organizer.com. Fabulous. We are in the last 5 minutes of our workshop. Is there one more burning question in the audience? Yes. And then I'm going to reserve the last 3 minutes for a speed round of one lesson you'd like to share with new teachers for the panelists. Just like one thing. Anyways, yes.
So I'm a euphonium player. Yeah. I'm in my master's. I've played in a lot of ensembles, not on euphonium. It's kind of a requirement of our instrument to be able to play either trombone or tuba. I've played in ensembles on trombone, tuba, and even trumpet before. How do you convince parents of students of instruments not your own, so if say there was a trombone player or a tuba player, that I'm still a viable option as a teacher? Because I've had an experience where there was a student, I was volunteering at a high school who said they were looking for a teacher. They were a tuba player. I said, well, I could do some lessons over the next 2 months while I'm here. They went to their parents to say, hey, I found a teacher. And their parents were like, I would prefer you to have a real tuba player than this guy who plays euphonium, even though all the technique and the basics and the fundamentals are pretty much the same. How do you convince a parent it's like that you can still take part and help advance their child?
That's a good question.
That's a really good question. And I it's like, how do you convince a parent? Yeah.
I think that I'll speak as a string player. I think that's an issue that happens more in the brass world because the instruments, like there's multiple instruments that are fairly similar in terms of their technical approach. I'm saying this as a non-brass player, so anyway, but I think being able to play and teach multiple instruments, although Carole is obviously super multi-talented, but I think it's slightly more common in the brass world. I mean, I think for us, violin and viola would be the thing, and it's not common that we have to convince parents to let us teach viola just because violin is so much more frequently requested.
That's true. If you're talking to the parent, maybe you could have a couple bullet points ready. It's just like, these techniques are the same, and these are some other people that teach. Like, I know, like at MUN even, like there's no French horn teacher here, but if you play the French horn, you study with Alan Klaus, right? So it's like you could have maybe a couple of examples to reference. And sounds like they, Totally. Right, sounds like a little parent education. I
wow.
Think,
talking about the university professor thing is probably maybe the best selling point.
Yeah, maybe. Try that out. So with our final 2 minutes, I just like, if there's one phrase, one sentence, one little tidbit of advice for new teachers in the room, we're just going to do a lightning round and then say good night. So for me, I say like, my little tidbit is something that's we've talked a lot about is that we're part of a really passion-driven field. And I think one of the most important things in a lesson I constantly have to reteach myself is to be a good boss to yourself. So figure out what that means for you and then try to stick to your guns. What do you think, Lauren?
I think one thing that I have learned and that I'm really working on this year is being really clear and direct with people and not having that be a big deal. Because if you are anticipating a potential conflict, you think you're telling somebody something they don't want to hear. I'm thinking of policy, makeup lessons, stuff like that, or telling them the violin they bought is too big, that kind of thing. You're anticipating something that may not happen. And often when you're really clear and direct, people respect you and they are grateful for your expertise because that is what they are coming to you for. They don't want you to be sort of wishy-washy. Then they get the impression that you are unsure, right? So I think don't be afraid to just be honest and upfront with people, and they will respond.
Tiffany?
100%. It's very, very good advice. I would say stay connected with your communities, that being your teaching communities, so your fellow teachers, a lot of you are students, and I'm sure you have your friend groups and you're all going to probably go on and teach a little bit. Stay connected, stay talking about it. That'll keep you accountable and also excited and motivated. Also your community of your studio, because it really is a little community, and trying to do studio events and stuff that keeps everybody connected, keeps you in touch with what your studio wants. Why are your families coming to you and not somebody else? And making sure that you're continuing to provide that experience.
And Carole?
I'm going to finish off by just promoting the Registered Music Teachers Association. Here's why. For teachers, your name is listed on our website, so that gives you a voice to gather students. It provides professional development resources, and it's not just our association, but also through the Canadian Federation. You have access to their resources also to learn about teaching. We offer some liability insurance for your private studio and your students, even when they go to recitals. We share professional and business policies. I mentioned the policies over here. There are competitions and awards for teachers as well as for students. We liaise with the community, and we're here. We've been involved with Play Piano NL, Kiwanis, an approach for another group for a new scholarship proposal, etc. So I feel that this is really the most important organization in the province because we're concerned about the teaching profession in the whole province and not just private teachers. We also have a whack of opportunities for students. I have a few flyers here. I can see I didn't print off enough, just with some information. You can take it. Our website's there if you want to get more information. These are some of our policy cards here. And if I run out and you still want one, feel free to leave your email right there.
Thank you. Yes. So thanks, everybody. This event was a partnership between the Canadian Federation of Musicians, Local 820, Music NL, and the MUN School of Music. Thanks to all of our partners and our sponsors. Anyways, have a great night. We will see you. Mark down October 16th for the final installment of this workshop series. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Carol.
Yeah, thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
Awesome. Look at that.